We're now going to tackle a very topical conversation topic, tariffs. We're going to have Truth Social on the screen behind us so we can keep you updated with any changes as we go on. But Ehsan, would you like to introduce yourself? I know you two hate each other because we have a Canadian and an American on the panel.
Yeah, we did suggest that maybe Al should sit between us, but we figured we can keep the hockey fights in North America. So I'm Ehsan Monfared. I'm an aviation attorney based out of Canada. We do a lot of transactional and regulatory work, and a lot of those transactions involve deals to the U.S., from the U.S., and in some way, either from a maintenance facility perspective or PPI location, entail us dealing with U.S. issues. So that's how I come into this conversation.
Tobias Kleitman with TVPX. If you don't know who we are, we have a couple services that we provide. We're an owner trust company, providing FAA owner trust services. We have somewhere in the neighborhood of 2,600 airplanes in trust all over the world. And then we have a unique offering where we're a licensed U.S. customs brokerage as well. So we help our clients import and export aircraft out of the United States for our trust customers and non-trust customers. And so we are on the front lines of what's going on in the world in the U.S. with tariffs.
And what is going on?
Right now? So just if we go back to CJI London, tariffs were on, then they were off, then they were on, then they were off, then they were on with reciprocal tariffs at much higher rates, and now they're sort of off. So we're basically at 10% across the board. And what's concerning me now is we don't know what's going to happen in July when we hit the 90-day deadline for the 3-month pause on tariffs. Are they going to go back up to 20% for some countries? Switzerland was at 31%, I believe. Which had a significant impact on Pilatus product. But they're on now at 10%, and we're seeing a mixed bag of activity. We're seeing some deals fall through because of tariffs. We're seeing people pay tariffs, actually. Handful have said, we want the plane, we got a good price, we'll pay the tariff. Some people are sort of stuck in a difficult spot where they entered into an agreement before tariffs were in place, and so now they're faced with, do I walk away from my deposit, or do I pay the tariff? So that's a difficult decision that some people are having to deal with. We're still importing airplanes that are not subject to tariffs, so there's still transactions that are happening. We're exporting aircraft from the United States. There's no tariffs for exporting.
I was going to ask, which aircraft aren't subject to tariffs?
So, U.S.-made aircraft, Gulfstream, Textron product, some Embraer Phenom 100s and 300s that are, 8 years old or newer. You get to about 9, 10 years, and you want to check with Embraer and make sure that they weren't Brazilian versions of 100s and 300s. U.S. goods are still, for the most part, safe to import, free from tariffs.
So the reason why this matters is we're talking about the U.S. market, but it's the largest market by every measure. And it also has the most amount of MRO facilities. So when we have clients that are looking to transact, one of the things that some people may not know is that in order to close a deal in the United States, you have to legally import it. And that becomes complicated when you have a product that would be subject to the new tariffs, right?
And when you talk about importing it, this is literally the first time it flies in to the US and someone comes out and ticks a form.
So when you bring an aircraft into the U.S. for sale, it's merchandise, and you need to make entry like a container full of toys or clothing or anything crossing the border on a truck, coming in on a ship. It's just aircraft are a little unique. They're the mode of transportation and they're the merchandise at the same time. And so what you're supposed to do is, you come in for a pre-buy. You come in, the first thing is you stop in Burlington, Vermont, you stop in Anchorage, Alaska, you stop in southern Texas somewhere, you make entry, and then you go on your way. And up until, the tariffs were in place, pretty straightforward, duty-free environment. You get a customs broker, you give them power of attorney, they get you a customs bond. Generally, a $50,000 bond was sufficient. The premium for that bond was $200. You pay the merchandise processing fee, which is capped right now at $632, I think, and 64 cents. And you go on your way. Now it's a whole new world. And if you're looking at 10% on the value of the aircraft, the importer of record has to pay that. And so, the logistics of closing and doing business in the U.S. for aircraft subject to tariffs has completely changed. And we just need to adapt and adapt quickly. If you have a buyer in the U.S. and they're looking for an aircraft and say they find a Dassault product in Europe, you can't just, you wouldn't come to the U.S. for your pre-buy. It wouldn't make any sense. Someone's got to pay the tariff, and you don't get it back if that transaction falls through. So you want to start thinking about doing your pre-buy outside of the U.S. Maybe there's price concessions, once you get down to closing, and because the buyer's going to say, well, geez, I've got this added 10% cost. So I think that's a real possibility as well.
I'm worried we're giving away all the answers to the questions we had put up to ask. So can we ask, what's this first one here?
Giving that one away.
We've given this one away. All right.
And I can put it up now. Slide it.
Okay, let's go to the next one, because I'm pretty sure we haven't given that one away.
Let me get that one right.
Yeah. So one of the things, and we're going to get to this question next, but does the state of registry matter? That's something that people, and when you're importing an aircraft, what we're talking about when we say import, we're not talking about your regulatory import with the Civil Aviation Authority. So we're not saying you change your registration over from Maltese registration to N registration. We're talking about just the customs importation process that you need to go through. And so that's one important distinction we should make. Okay. So let's see what the answers to this question is. Do you want to read it, or should I? The most important factors in determining whether tariffs apply, it's over there, is the state of registry and the place from which the importation takes place. There's some of the professionals.
Yeah, no, that's false.
All right.
Yeah.
Good, you guys got this right.
Yeah, registration's irrelevant, and the tariff is based on country of manufacture.
Yeah.
I mean, that's really what it comes down to. Even if the aircraft is already U.S. registered and it's been outside of the U.S. or wherever for 5-10 years, you're bringing it back to the U.S. It's got to be imported, and if it's subject to tariffs, it's got to be paid. And it's got to be paid within 8 days of entry. So as a customs broker, we insist, you got to send us the money before we make entry, because customs is going to be looking for that money within a couple days. And if the tariff isn't paid, the bond gets liquidated, and then it becomes a big mess with the surety that's going to, go after the importer of record. We haven't seen that yet, so.
Do you want to go back to slides?
No, I think let's just we can keep talking about some of the factors that people should be aware of, and if you guys have questions, that's the other thing that we can speak to. But this was supposed to be, and we were going to talk about, is the impact on the broader market. And so to some extent, what's happened now is we've bifurcated the global business aircraft or global aircraft market, really, where you have products that are in the U.S. that would otherwise be subject to tariffs if they had to be imported, but they're in the U.S., okay? And then you have products outside the U.S. that are subject to tariffs that if a client wants to buy them, they would have to pay currently the 10% in most cases. So what we're seeing happen is attempts at arbitrage between assets that are in the tariff zone and buying outside. We are the kinds of legal agreements and the flexibility that we need to put in place for our clients, knowing that this is the world that we're in today, is substantially different than what we were doing before. Simply because it's an uncertain environment and we don't know. For example, Bombardier, with the issuance of a certificate on their products, can sell assets and a new aircraft or pre-owned aircraft into the U.S.
Which is, I think that's important, because in January we thought Bombardier was in trouble, but because the U.S. is now using the U.S., Canada, Mexico agreement, Canadian products that can cross Bell helicopters, Bombardiers. But someone is saying, how do you determine the country of origin on an aircraft? For example, a Gulfstream aircraft with Pratt & Whitney Canada engines.
Yeah.
So Gulfstream aircraft with Canadian engines is U.S. manufactured. So, Gulfstream is going to import those engines from Canada when they're building their aircraft. And everything tariff shifts that goes into that airplane. Everything becomes the airplane. And when you import into the U.S., they're not looking for, an appendix of where are these parts from, where are those parts from, where is this assembly from. It's an aircraft. So they don't distinguish between, where are the engines made for this particular model. And this doesn't work that way.
So for 4 to 5 years, our industry has operated in a tariff-free environment. And that makes a lot of sense when you think about the mobility of the assets themselves, the fact that you may need to get parts when an aircraft's AOG, that may come from different countries, and you may be in a different country than your state of registry. That was an agreement that was entered into in 1973. And the world agreed to give itself till January 1st, 1980, for those trade barriers to be dismantled. And here, almost overnight, we've erected massive trade barriers which are shifting.
Although it does seem quite possible that we've seen automakers have an exemption. It does seem quite possible that, Boeing is lobbying hard against tariffs. The EU's got Airbus. It does seem quite likely that we could go back to that situation.
Yeah, I mean, the U.S. from an export perspective has been a massive winner when it comes to aerospace. They export something to the tune of $140 billion of aerospace products a year for every $20 billion of aerospace products they import. So this has been wildly successful policy for them. It was a policy of liberalization that the U.S. spearheaded. And so, yeah, it's possible that they'll do a carve-out. Certainly, I know that trade associations in the United States, Tobias and I are involved with the National Business Aviation Association. We're supporting those efforts. They're advocating for it. Aerospace is one of the top 2 contributors of exports for the United States. And so it's really unfortunate that this is how...
We don't have a trade deficit
Yeah,
in aerospace in the U.S. It's
So,
surplus.
quick question. How do you know if it's subject to tariffs? If someone's got a legacy from 2005, how can they find out?
What type of aircraft?
I don't know, legacy from 2005.
Well, if you're not sure, you can talk to the OEM and ask them, and they'll tell you. I mean, I've had several come up recently where it was like, okay, it's right on the edge. I alluded to the Phenom, 100s and 300s, and just talk to the OEM and say, this is what we're looking at. This is the serial number. Is it U.S. goods or not? I think that's
Okay.
that's the right place to start.
prepare yourself that it's not quick, because again, the OEMs have been in this 45-year period where they didn't have to worry about all the different trade agreements, bilaterals that have happened, like USMCA, which is the new North America Free Trade Agreement.
Is there a way to freeze the payment of the customs fee by a temporary importation mechanism or other mechanism?
So we've got something called, and we're starting to see these, it's a TIB or temporary importation bond. And they're only useful for aircraft coming in for repair, alteration, and maintenance. So if you have an aircraft subject to tariffs, let's say it's a Dassault product, and you're coming in for scheduled maintenance somewhere within the U.S., you can import under a temporary importation bond. It's special type of entry, but there are some caveats. One is you can't sell the goods in the U.S. that are in the U.S. under a TIB, so it's not useful in the context of a sale or pre-buy, and you have to export within a year. And if you have a TIB violation, the penalty is 2 times the tariff. Now you can also get extensions if you need more time, which would be unusual for a business jet. And the other challenge is that the bond is going to be getting the customs bond might also be challenging. In a duty-free environment, as I alluded to earlier, we'd get a $50,000 bond that would cover it, $200 premium. But if the tariff is, call it $2 million, the potential tariff, and then the potential penalty is 2 times, then you've got to go to customs at the port of entry and say, okay, what are your TIB requirements? And every port's a little bit different. Some want a bond for the amount of the total. Some say, well, we'll do 110%, and some will say we'll do 10%. So you've got to kind of figure out where you're coming in, you talk to the port, and not surprisingly, sometimes they don't know, and they'll say, well, talk to the surety, and the surety will say, well, talk to customs, or talk to the Centers for Excellence within customs, and eventually you sort of work your way through it and you get to someone who says, we're at the 10% regime, so on a $4 million tariff, they want a $400,000 bond. Well, if the importer is a special purpose entity, the surety might want financials. People are very private. They don't want to give up their financials. UBOs don't want to give up their financials. If it's a special purpose entity that doesn't have financials, then somebody else has got a guarantee. So it's just the bonding requirements could be challenging on a TIB. Not impossible, but you got to plan more time in advance. You can't just say, we're coming tomorrow, we need to do a TIB. We need several weeks. If there's a potential tariff involved.
Okay, if you export an aircraft from the FAA and then register it with another registry, will you be charged US tariffs if you import it back to the FAA?
So back to what we said, registration's irrelevant. So going on and off the registries makes no difference. The tariffs apply when you cross the border and the aircraft is merchandise for sale, for repair and alteration, lease returns, Another challenge for our industry are banks that
Yep.
take aircraft back off lease or foreclosing on aircraft. They don't know what to do because they would normally bring them back to the U.S. and then remarket them. They'll probably keep them outside of the country until they can sell them and figure out what to do. But the registry, you have to forget about the registry. And unfortunately, the registry, the FAA has something called an export C of A. So people say, well, we exported it. That's totally different than a U.S. customs export. And that's a source of confusion that was a problem several years ago that the industry has actually sorted through pretty well, and things were much better than they were a few years ago.
Okay, let's do yes/no answers. I know you won't do those. An unregistered Boeing aircraft is being outfitted in Europe. It is subject to is it subject to tariffs once it goes back to the US?
No.
That's a good question. I don't have a great answer for that. I'm sorry.
Tobias made me swear I wasn't going to get into the substantial transformation test, which we're not going to get into. But I think that would be a no on the basis that the fundamental characteristic of it being an aircraft hasn't changed, even though
you might have to report the value of the parts and labor that you purchased when you come back in.
But no one's got
in that case, I would want to get, and there are some gray areas, and I'm telling people, there's so much money at stake here. There are some very good trade compliance attorneys out there that will provide opinions.
Or just put a tatty blanket over the couch so they can't see the new leather, you're fine. And it's the same, there is no tariff on Middle Eastern products. What if the aircraft is sold first to a Middle Eastern company and then resold? That doesn't help, does it?
No.
Great. Thoughts on the G200, G280? Ask Gulfstream.
That's another one I would, are they Israeli manufactured, or do they come to the U.S. and they're substantially transformed? I don't think we have a good answer. So
okay.
It's another one where I would talk to the OEM.
This one is a good one for you, Ehsan. If a Gulfstream or Textron is subject to tariffs when purchasing engines, if they actually don't pay it on Pratt & Whitney Canada because that's part of USMCA, but if Gulfstream's importing a Rolls-Royce engine, are the tariffs technically also impacting American products?
Yes, I think so. Yeah, so if Gulfstream's buying Rolls-Royce engines and they're being imported into the U.S., they're going to pay the tariff. The same way that Embraer is going to import their green aircraft into the U.S. from Brazil, the Praetor 500s and the 600s, if there's a tariff to be paid, they'll pay them. Now, what I think the OEMs are doing, because there's a lot of U.S. content in these things, and they have the ability to go to U.S. Customs and say, 40% of this is U.S. content. Here's the documentation for the cost of this, the cost of that, and they'll be able to deduct the cost of the U.S. content from the import value and pay a lower number. But they're really the only ones that have the ability to do that. I've had people ask me, we're importing, we want to buy this aircraft, it's subject to tariffs. Can we deduct, 40% of the value because 40% is U.S. content? And the problem with that is it's completely subjective. So I don't know how you do that. And then when U.S. Customs asks you for the documentation, what are you going to give them?
We just had Delta Airlines take delivery of 2 Airbuses in Japan. And the reason they did that is so that they can fly from Japan to the United States and back without ever consuming the good in the U.S. Oh. So that's how it's impacting U.S. consumers. That's how it's impacting U.S. companies, as they're having to get creative with the structure of laws to find slight loopholes where they can avoid these until the uncertainty subsides.
That's right, I didn't know that one. Here's an interesting one. What can charter operators do? In a situation, a Dubai charter operator flies a Pilates to America.
So just be clear, regular operations are not impacted by this. So if you're doing business flights or you're doing personal flights, those are not subject to tariffs. So, I mean, when aircraft come and go from the U.S. all the time, just in their normal operation, it's when they're involved in a commercial transaction, when they're being marketed for sale,
Maintenance.
when they're coming in for repair, alteration, maintenance, that's when you got to be careful.
Yeah.
But charter operators, business as usual, unless the aircraft are, being marketed for sale in the U.S. or, coming in to be sold. Or obviously a charter operator, well, if they're buying an aircraft and it's subject to tariffs and they're bringing it into the U.S. to be based in the U.S., they're going to pay the tariff.
And I think the last question, I could be wrong, I'm not sure the last question is completely serious.
Let's do Greenland.
Well, not if they become the 51st state, because Canada sure as hell ain't going to be it. They're clapping.
And I think that might be the best time to stop this session. Thank you very much to both of you.
You guys.